From the market basket turmoil here to international crisis around the world, about the only place that's quiet right now is Capitol Hill, with members of Congress now in the middle of their August recess. And that includes our next guest. Niki Tsongas represents Massachusetts' 3rd Congressional District, which includes, of course, Lowell, Lawrence, and Haverhill. And we welcome you to Greater Boston this evening. Thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
I want to pick up right where we just left off, and that's the issue of market basket. You were one of the first politicians to come out and to say to the board, we need to reinstate Arthur T. Demoulas. And in all fairness, we want to say that Arthur T. Demoulas has been a supporter of yours. He has contributed to your reelection campaigns through the years. Do you think that that is going to happen? Do you think he'll be reinstated?
Well, one has to hope so. I've been a market basket customer since I first married my husband and moved to Lowell in 1969. And the relationship between the Demoulas family and the Tsongas family actually goes back to when both families first came to the United States and started their businesses. The Demoulas family in the small market business and my husband's family in the dry cleaning business. So while I certainly wasn't part of the family at that point, I've heard long-standing the stories. But more recently, as I've been a member of Congress, I've hosted Congress on Your Corners at Market Basket in the early years of my first being elected. And I have to say, I always went because it was the Lowell, Massachusetts supermarket is just where we went. It was down the street. It was convenient. It was always had everything I needed, and always at a price that was great. But as I was doing Congress on Your Corner, that is when I really began to learn how important this business was to its customers who were traveling many times long distances because of the impact on their pocketbook, that they could get great produce, great whatever the particular goods were at a well affordable cost. And it was really an eye-opening experience for me. And then, of course, you know, I've seen the same employees over the years. A couple of years ago, they inaugurated, well, every employee had a little plaque on their jacket, which said how many years they were there, and you'd look and see it'd be 20 years, 15 years. So I just know firsthand how critically important this business has been to the community, because Arthur T. is a great philanthropist. The way in which he has made possible and hired so many people. Often overlooked is the numbers of disabled adults that work in the supermarket. I mean, it really on every front. You just see what he's done for this business, but also for the places that he is and the people that he serves and the people who work for and with him.
So let me ask you very quickly here, back to the question though, do you think that he'll be reinstated?
It's my hope. It's my hope. You know, I, like many others, have had to seek out other supermarkets, and I have to say, I think there's a kind of mourning going on, that we're all so hopeful that this can be resolved in a way that puts RDT back in charge because of the market that he led and the business he created and the contributions to the communities he has made.
Let's change gears if we could just a bit, and let's talk about Iraq. President Obama has authorized aerial missions over Iraq, including the dropping of humanitarian supplies, but also some airstrikes in an effort to push ISIS back. Do you think, he says, however, I do want to add in, he does say that this is as far militarily as we would be willing to go. Do you think this is the right step?
Well, I certainly think the humanitarian aid was necessary. It was an emergency. The Iraqi government requested that assistance, and we know, we've all seen the plight of the Yazidi people as they were forced onto this mountain. You know, no trees, nothing, exposed to the high heat in the middle of the day, the cold at night, and we see just a human suffering. So I absolutely think that was important. And I do think, as we have a consul in Erbil, which is the capital in the Kurdish area of Iraq, and the threat, the sometimes threat or feared threat to our embassy in Baghdad, that there always we have to seek to protect American personnel. But there was just a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives in which I would say the vast majority on both sides of the aisle said that any further action requires, and we would ask our president to come to Congress to make the case. And I do think I, like many, are very fearful of the slippery slope, and do hope and would ask that our president come to us as he considers whatever further action he might be considering.
Let me ask you about something a little closer here to home, and that was the migrant children. They're now crossing the border illegally. Governor Patrick had proposed that Camp Edwards might be a good place down on Cape Cod for some of these children to temporarily be housed. There was quite an uproar about that idea, and now the governor has said that it's not necessary. Were you surprised by the reaction of the people who live down on the Cape, and for that matter, a number of people who just live here in the Bay State?
Well, I think that, it is an issue that we have to address down on the border. It's really not a crisis of the border per se. It's a result of all the upheavals in Central America. These are essentially children and their families who feel their children's lives are at risk. It's a humanitarian issue. It's not really a border issue. The crisis at the border is because many are coming here. And as we enforce the law that was put in place when President Bush was our president, that was designed to address trafficking in minor children and put in place a process for determining whether these children who were showing up at the border were at risk for trafficking, to make sure we weren't sending young people and children back into harm's way. So it was the implementation of that law, combined with the disarray in many of these Central American communities that led to this crisis. I think there was a role for Massachusetts, were we asked to play. We know that whatever young people came here, the federal government would absorb all the costs. I was very reassured around whatever health issues there might be of these young people. They would all be carefully vetted, and that this was very much a temporary instance. So, but I do think these questions have to be asked, and it's, and then we have to look into it and develop a real understanding of what is being asked. But that being said, I think with all the answers we received, it was very appropriate for us to temporarily house, if necessary, these young people. We do need to, and I'm open to relooking at the law, as long as we don't shortchange the due process requirements that were put in place by that law, and make sure we have a sufficient number of judges to manage this in a more timely way.
Let me ask you about sexual assaults in the military, because I know this is an issue that has popped up in the headlines, unfortunately, time and time again, and you have felt very strongly about it. Give me a sense of what we were talking about. I know that you've seen Department of Defense studies on this issue. How many people are involved in this? Let's start there with just some statistics, if you will. Well,
we started out with a number of statistics, but one report a couple of years ago did a sort of blind survey of active duty personnel, and over 26,000 people reported being the victim of some form of military sexual trauma. This is not all the worst case scenario, but some unwanted sexual contact. That was that survey. There are statistics out there that suggest 1 in 5 female members of the military are exposed to some form of unwanted sexual contact. 14% of our military is now female. It's expected that it will go up to about 25% by 2025. But it's not just a crime, male on female crime. The raw numbers are actually more male on male. There are more male on male assaults. And the figures are one thing, but really what made it real for me was I met with, there's a Wounded Warrior Luncheon. I went to it. There were several women in the room. I went over to them to say hello and hear what their experiences were. And in the course of our conversation said, we just had a hearing on the issue of sexual assault in the military. This was in 2008. I was a newly elected member of Congress. I said, is the prevalence of this, as this hearing would suggest, is it that prevalent? One woman, a nurse, she was, in her late 40s, had been deployed several times to Afghanistan and Iraq, said, "Ma'am, I'm more afraid of my own soldiers than I am of the enemy." And that made it real for me. And from there on, working across the aisle with Congressman Mike Turner, who's actually coming to Massachusetts to visit my district next week. We've worked together and have been able to implement many serious reforms, but it's not over.
The VA reform law, which was just signed by the governor, or the president, I'm sorry, last week, it does include in that some money for sexual assault counseling. Is that a start? Is that a direction to go?
Well, whatever starts in the active duty ends up in the VA. So what you've had are these many, many assaults while people have been serving, and as they make their way into the VA system, the post-traumatic post-traumatic stress disorder, some of the health issues that are associated with it begin to be express themselves, and our veterans need help in dealing with the aftermath of it. So we recognize that there was a shortcoming in the VA system, and as part of our broader efforts to reform the veterans' health care, we've included language around this as well.
Right. Well, it's tough work, that's for sure, but I know that you've put lots of efforts in it and will continue to do so.
It's important work. No member of our military should be at risk from harm from their own.
Congresswoman Niki Tsongas, good to see you. Thank you for
Kim.
being here.